Welcome to another episode of So You Think You Can Doc. Today I have Dan Gralnick with me, who I'm going to call a mid-career, I could be wrong, mid-career urologist. And we're going to kind of get into his life, what it's like, and see whether or not it's something that you want to avoid or maybe it's something you want to embrace. Urology is one of those things where you really got to, I think, know what you're getting into before you make that kind of decision.
For sure.
Outside of medicine, most people are just like, ooh, right? That's kind of their first response for the most part. But before we get into urology as a whole, let's find out about you. In other words, where'd you come from, other than the obvious?
Well, so I was born in Chicago and then spent a couple of years in Louisiana when my dad was in the military, and we moved to Phoenix when I was 4. So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and kind of small family, just my sister and I, and the rest of the family was all, in the Midwest, and so we didn't see them unless they came out to visit. So it was really like just the 4 of us and then all of the people we met there.
So you're kind of out there in Phoenix, and I've never been to Phoenix. I had a trip planned in COVID, long story. But so I've always pictured Phoenix as like big city, but you also mentioned, well, I guess you don't remember Chicago at that age, but I picture Chicago as big city. I grew up in New York City, also obviously big city. What's Phoenix like as far as size?
So weirdly, Phoenix, when I moved there, it was not a big city yet. It was still kind of middle-sized at that point, but people were moving pretty consistently there at that point, and so that was like the early 70s. I mean, this is, forever ago, but it went from kind of a middle-sized city to a big city. And the nice thing, or the bad thing out in Phoenix, was that there's land everywhere, and so there was no reason to ever build tall. It was always everybody just built wide. And so there was never a basement. Never saw a house with a basement. Really rare to see a house with a second floor. It was just, everybody just went out wider. And it was places that now are sort of the middle of Scottsdale were rural. And my wife, she had a horse. She would ride her horse to different parts of town. And it was just kind of, it sounds so old, but
that sums it up, right?
Yeah. And then it grew quite large. And so when I go back to visit, it's almost like I don't recognize it.
And yeah, Phoenix, I'd imagine you weren't landlocked by water, So what I picture is Madison always tried to be that way, right? We're not going to go be elevated, we're going to have spread out, but then we hit water, right? And then everything started getting congested and start building up. But in Phoenix, I guess they had the opportunity of spreading in multiple directions, and it kind of gets you out there. So you said you grew up, meaning like high school?
Yeah, from like a little kid until I went off to college, I was there. And at that point, I wanted to go somewhere else for college, so I ended up in Philadelphia at University of Pennsylvania. I knew I wanted to go kind of away, and I went either East or West Coast, and found that it didn't take very long to be elsewhere to realize things that you liked about places as a kid. And so I thought that was kind of interesting.
I think, maybe not on purpose, but you kind of did the right thing. In other words, expose yourself to other places, right? I have so much family in New York City that never left New York City, and they can't imagine being anywhere else, right? And, with those exposures, you start realizing, oh, I like this or I like that. It's like, how would you know? I always thought I wanted to live in warm weather. I moved to Miami. I lived there for about a year and a half. Every day was hot. And after 2 months, I'd been to everywhere I wanted to go, and it was still hot. And then I was like, oh yeah, maybe I actually do really like, I like 4 seasons. Yeah, I actually did like 4 seasons is what I realized. But it took me moving out there, and really, I guess, experiencing it to find out. So before you leave and you're kind of in high school, did you have any parents in medicine?
My dad was an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and in private practice. He had one partner. And when he finished his time in the military that he was required to do, they had grown up in Chicago and they wanted not to live in the cold, and they decided to either move to San Diego or Phoenix. And I'm not really sure how they picked, but we ended up in Phoenix. And so he was in practice as I was growing up. And I remember that he, was around a little less than maybe you would expect on TV, but it was enough for what I was used to. And my mom, who had been a teacher, was just stay at home for most of my childhood. She did start a travel agency. I don't know if they even exist anymore, but so she was a travel agent for a while. And when I was maybe late grade school and high school. And so she was always around, and we sort of got around Phoenix is just spread out. And so it was always, we just biked or walked everywhere.
But you had this exposure, this person who was in medicine, your dad, and then obviously, your mother was living a very different life from him. So my father's a pulmonologist. Obviously, both of us ended up in medicine. And then there's my kids who want to have nothing to do with medicine. And, this has come up with other people, and it's like, what's going on there, right? There's almost this generational thing where it's like, okay, well, why are doctors' kids not wanting to be doctors? It's almost like a red flag for other people who are like thinking about medicine. It's like, wait a minute, if they know, talk to one of the neurosurgeons here, and it was the same concept, and said, why don't we talk to the kids? Why don't we find out like what it is? And it's like, well, I don't want to talk to the kids. Why don't we have other kids talk to the kids? They'll listen to them. They don't want to like me. Hey, what are you doing today? So I think it's maybe an offshoot or something to explore that maybe is a little more to it. So I was involved with my father's practice, and I had those exposures here or there. There are a lot of things I did not like, and yeah, he was never there for the most part. There was definitely that feeling, but yet we did it, right? And there's something there that I don't really understand it at all, but there's something there that I don't know. I guess we'll get into it, but.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. And when I think back, my dad really liked his job. I think that he enjoyed what he did. He really liked kind of being the doctor, and he was a very friendly person. But I think that he was proud of what he did. And I went to his office, periodically and would play around. They'd have a sound booth because he did hearing and stuff. And I'd screw around in his office when, like on a weekend or something when he was on call and he dragged me somewhere. For the most part, it seemed like a positive. But I think the other thing was that we ended up being friends with lots of other doctor families. And so like a lot of our friends, one of the parents was a doctor, and maybe, we were the kids that hung out together. And I don't know if that was coincidental or if we sort of drove together somehow.
Right. You end up, and that's a good point, because it's not just, it's like parenting, right? It's like they can tell you something, or you can tell kids something, but what you do and what they see you doing is probably more relevant, for what they get out of it. And maybe it's not just your parent, that's whatever doctor, but it's their friends. So you may not, and naturally, of course, I'm sure doctors have more doctor friends than non-doctors, right?
It's something to talk about in social settings that they might do as well. You'll talk about things that you do at work. The people that'll understand it best are people who do something similar. But I know that I have two kids, 27 and 25-year-old daughters, and neither of them, they both love science, but neither of them want to go into medicine, at least not directly, because they saw, now my wife's a doctor also, so they saw two parents, and they saw kind of the time that we put in and other things like that, and I think that they chose not to do it because of that. But they were interested vaguely, but chose against it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, our kids are like, nope. My daughter is in UW here in business school, and my son is likely heading that route as well. So, they probably chose correctly.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way after seeing us. But I feel like there's something there. I don't really know what it is. I probably need help trying to figure it out one day. So you're in high school. You obviously have the family friends exposure, but are you thinking about medicine at this point? When you're going to college?
I think I always thought that I'd probably go into medicine. I did have other, like I really liked physics, and I ended up being a physics major in college because I really enjoyed sort of the puzzle. Like I just pictured everything as a game, and it made it so that it felt much less like studying and just playing games. So it didn't seem like work as much. And so I know that's really weird. And so in college, I ended up, like most of the other people were going into engineering. And so, like, I even dabbled and thought, do I want to do this instead? But I think in the back of my mind, I always sort of pictured myself as going into medicine. Now, I certainly didn't think I'd end up in urology, but I did like the vague idea of medicine in general. I liked that.
Yeah, it's so what you're saying is, you were into I guess the understanding and the logic behind it, and I think it kind of breeds into some of our choices of specialties, like later on, right? So for me, I was a chemistry major, and I'm a nephrologist now. It's basically like chemistry, and I like physics and the dialysis machine, and it's like very straightforward to me. So to me, I can't understand how people do like oncology. To me, it's just like, I don't know, you just have to remember all this stuff. We don't really understand any of this. We don't know why it happened. That's what I feel like. I'm sure oncologists feel very differently about this as well, too. Yes. But I think it breeds into it. And when I think about, urology, which obviously we'll get into a little bit more here, is, you've got physical structures, right? Like, there's logic that's, occurring here. And then there's all these sub whatever areas, right? Because then cancer's there too, right?
Yeah.
You kind of touch on a lot of different things. But okay, so you're into like
sciences,
physics, right?
Yeah, physics especially.
And I was kind of the same way. And so, like with my daughter, she had to apply for a major going into college, right? I don't think I did that. I think I then applied like once I was already in. I went to Stony Brook in New York, and then I think it was my second year. Then you had to like choose your major or something like that, or did you go in like physics major straight to?
I think that one of the schools, they sort of ask what you're interested in, and I think it was like Berkeley, UC Berkeley, that when they asked what I wanted to do and I described it, they basically put me as an applicant to the engineering school. And so what I didn't know was that when I got in there was that I was accepted to the engineering school. And really, if I had randomly decided to go there instead of Pennsylvania, then, things may have been different. I'm not really sure. But I knew that I wanted to do sort of something with physics, and they did ask enough to describe it that I ended up somehow in the wrong one. I only applied to 4 colleges. I mean, things were very different back in the dinosaur days of me. They were all individually, so they were like $50 a piece, which was a lot of money back then. And I only applied to 4. It was 2 on the West and 2 on the East Coast, and it was very different.
I was still in that wrong. So you're kind of in this mode where you're now starting, we're going to say undergrad at this point. Okay. You're moving forward with engineering / physics, a lot of sciences, right? You have all these prereqs anyway, so you don't really have to fully commit,
right?
In your first or even second year, as far as which way you're truly going. Was there some angle? Were you always kind of like, hey, I'm going to apply to like medical school after this? Was that still there, or were you like, I'm not sure which way this is going?
I think I always thought I'd probably apply to medical school, but as I met more people in college, and especially in my classes, when they were all, like they were getting these internships, like between first and second year of college, I remember that one of the buddies that I think we had like 3 classes together our freshman year, and he got some job at like Dow Corning, and so that was in Delaware, which was only like 60 miles from Philadelphia, and he got paid like 5 times what I got paid. They paid him very well, hoping that he would then come back and stay with them, and he got to kind of do this physics during the summer. And so later when I saw him the next year and I was talking, I was like, that seems kind of cool. And you made how much? And and he didn't have to go home. He had an apartment, and that was crazy that you didn't go home. So.
Yeah. You also don't have all this additional school.
Right. Yeah. And what he was telling me, at least back then, was that when you graduated and started into engineering, that you got paid way more than you would expect, but you hit your maximum ability to make money. Like, they hit their top salary within 5 years. And so, like,
yeah, that's the really tough thing, I think, is like investing all this education, hoping for this thing to happen later on. While other people, and I remember this, my friends that just did like 4-year degrees and whatever, and then they were working for like Goldman Sachs and having like these incredible apartments in Manhattan. And I'm like, what? I've got loans. I'm going in debt here. What am I doing? But give them a few more years later, and they were having all these regrets. I didn't have, go back to school longer.
And they're not doing what they enjoyed. Like that, one of the greatest things from my standpoint is that, I look back on my life and realize I've enjoyed my job. Like there were always moments that you might regret what you did. But overall, like I couldn't really, unless I was taller and I played like professional sports, I think that I found the right job for me.
Yeah, and that's important. It's sometimes I think we're even caught up too much in the job was the right job as opposed to you made it the right job, which is slightly different. And I kind of want to get into some of that because in undergrad there are a lot of people who like sciences and they end up on doing some bench chemistry or whatever else it is, or engineering. But a lot of those people, I didn't see this at the time, but now I kind of look back at it and I say, what's happening to all our social skills? You look back and you say, a lot of those people, they don't want to talk to people, especially if they're sick or in some emotional part of their lives, right? But you weren't afraid of that. Now, obviously, you had seen your father navigate some of that, maybe not directly in front of you, but it didn't seem like something that was, I guess, impossible or out of reach because you've seen it in front of you. At least I felt that way as well. But were you, I'm going to just say social, for lack of a better description, but you're in undergrad, and were you like a social person, talking to people easily?
Mostly. I think that, science guys are a little bit nerdy at times, and so I was comfortable socially, which was different than a lot of the people I was with in the physics math. Like, I was probably like the craziest person in the class at that point because, and in some ways it was really good because even though I was kind of pre-med and doing all the prerequisites for that, but also kind of in the engineering track, I didn't have every class with all the same pre-meds. They all knew each other and there was a lot of competition between them. And I was sort of the outsider. They're like, oh, he's just some math guy. And so to some extent, that was good for me. But then I was in a group that, were not great socially, but I was the most social among them. So I could sort of make friends there, but then also outside. And, like my roommates were non-science people. And so that also helped.
Yeah, I've never thought about it, but I pretty much did the same thing, right? I was this smaller chemistry major. It was like chemical engineering, but it wasn't engineering. It was under chemistry, structural chemistry, that kind of stuff. And it was like, it's a huge school, all science, but everybody's taking biomedical, bio this, and then they're all pre-med. And then this group were like people who are actually into, chemistry, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it was kind of a parallel that way where I was like the social butterfly of this small world. Right? And I bring it up because people picture like, oh, I'm smart and I know science. I'm going to be a doctor. That means you can get through coursework. The job itself, day to day is talking to people.
It's a lot of people, yeah.
And if you don't like that, it just may not be the right place for you. Now, there are obviously parts of medicine where it's less that, pathology, radiology, where you don't have as much of that exposure. But but you kind of went into the extreme, right? And I guess we'll get into some more of the details of that. But here you are, you're in undergrad. I assume doing well with the sciences. You're kind of having fun. But then it's probably getting a third year and fourth year, and it's now becoming more of like decision time. You've got this friend, or at least one, if not many more, that are looking at starting their lives, kind of right away.
Yeah.
And it's looking pretty good. I worked as a chemist for a while, by the way. After everything was going great, and then still walked away, right? So I fell for it. Is what
That's
I'm
tough.
at.
I'm impressed. It was a little more direct for me. It was either maybe early in my third year of undergrad as a junior. I can't remember exactly when I took the MCAT, but I took the MCAT then and did very well on it, even though my grades were kind of marginal, honestly. I mean, in physics, it's all on a curve. And so, if you got a C, that's good. And the engineers, that was fine. They expected that. And then in the pre-med track, at least where I was, so they weren't that interested in being, the administration was not interested in helping me because I was not interested in sort of big name schools. My parents paid for most of college for me, but I was going to pay for whatever came after that. And so when they were talking about going to, some of the people in pre-med were talking about, oh, I'm going to go to Harvard, I'm going to go to these other places, and you'd see the price tag yearly, and it was brutal. And when I was thinking about paying for that, it was a different story. So I was probably going to go back to Arizona where it's cheap. And state schools were significantly less. And so they weren't that in, the administration, they're like, well, it's not a feather in our cap to say that you got into Arizona.
And I hear you. This is something that's in pretty much every school. You've got physics for physics people, and then you've got physics for pre-med. And it's a completely different scoring and scaling. I remember putting up my first physical chemistry test on my wall for motivation because I had gotten some ridiculous number. It was 30-something or 40-something, and it was a C, right? I'm just like, wow. So I know 30-something% of the work, and you're gonna
and that's average. Yeah.
Yeah, it was obnoxious. And you won't have those grades to be as competitive. But at this point, you've done well in the MCAT. You kind of recognize, I assume, that I could do this, right? This is not out of reach for me.
Well, and then also I did well on the MCAT, which made it a little easier. But I was actually skating a little bit toward the engineering side and was interviewing with people and sort of looking at, well, what else do I do? Because I only had a 3.0 or something like that as a grade point, and I knew that was much lower than a lot of people who were going into it, and I didn't know what that meant. And so I knew I would apply for medical school, but I was ready to go the other direction and interviewed with DuPont. I was getting set to have a job with DuPont Chemical.
Pfizer, and then so I was doing the same kind of dance. This is tough. You're kind of in this, I kind of want to go this way, but were you mentally committed to I'll be disappointed, or well, if it was meant to be?
Yeah, I think it was more of I'm going to play by the seat of my pants, and I've got a backup plan that I could sort of do physics and fun things that would probably be okay, but seemed like maybe it would get boring over years and years. And so I had a little bit of a concern about the longevity of that job.
Okay, so you were recognizing it that might be.
Just in the back of my mind. I don't know that it was really that much understood, right. But I knew that as soon as I got the MCAT score that I was doing well, that it would get me into an interview probably. And I figured that all you need is something that gets you into the interview for medical school, and I could bullshit my way into a position probably.
Well, you probably didn't even have to, right? Because what I guess it's tough to realize at that time, or from your position, but you're unique to them because you're coming with this heavy physics angle versus everybody else that they're seeing, right?
Well, and when I was applying to medical school, that was right the time that they were like, we have too many kind of nerds going into medicine, and we need people who are well-rounded. And so like, I barely spoke English. I mean, I was terrible. I mean, I barely passed any of my English classes. I was not good at that sort of thing. I was really just a science guy. And so I was a little concerned that, and I didn't have a lot of extracurricular activities that I could talk about. I did fluff things up a little bit on my... Oh, good. They do? I didn't know. I thought it was just me.
Fluffy, right? And it's going to come back down to, like, what is your actual content? That's going to be the next step. I feel like the next step is, like, AI to detect actual content within AI, other than fluff, right?
I remember that one of the things I put on my application for medical school, and I'm just trying to find anything that I could put that I did during college. One of the guys that I lived with, his brother was in D.C. in college, and so we drove down and went to visit him. And, we took a bunch of silly pictures along the way, and so I put myself as the photographer of the travel band.
I run a travel corporation.
And I mean, to the point where people asked me about it, I remember, and, then I could just sort of, it was something.
It shows you how much you're, like, starving for, like,
anything to talk about.
Anything different, right? Than, like, so what did you think of biology?
Well, that's when, because they're like, well, your GPA is lower than virtually everybody that is applying, why? And I was like, well, I was in physics and I also was doing this and that. And it was literally like, okay. Like, I was afraid that it was an absolute game ender. And, like, it was just such a small part of everything. And I think that's the other thing is, they want people to be in medicine, not just numbers.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important, part of the whole purpose of this whole podcast is this, right? It's letting these kids who are out there, like, I don't fit the mold of, like, the typical, like, yeah, that's probably good, right?
Yeah, we don't need more mold people necessarily.
We don't need more of those, right? So here you are, you're applied, you've got interviews, right? Like, they're talking to you about the GPA and, how that works out. Ali's here. He's going to join us.
Sorry.
Our resident co-host,
Evans.
also urologist. Ali, oh, yeah. It's probably done. I was going to say, just take your ID.
Oh, yeah.
We're trying to keep you affiliated as possible so we don't end up with more red tape.
That's smart.
We've walked through most of Dan's life up until we're in
I'm just about to die. Just about to die.
The most moments.
We skipped around a little bit, but we're sort of like at the point where I'm sort of figuring out how to apply to medical school and stuff like that. And so we were chatting about that. And so after I did well on the MCAT and sort of veered a little bit more toward medicine instead of engineering, that's when I started sending in applications. And again, they were all individual. I think that it was like you paid one fee and you got 4, and then you could send out more individually and you had to pay cash for all those.
You have to do separately.
Well, they always had some other, why do you want to go to Temple? It's like, well, I don't, but I want to get in somewhere. And so actually Temple was the first school I got into. And so I think that it was my senior year, and like you're in the application process and sort of worried about stuff and just trying to look ahead and, kind of taking classes, but also like not caring that much because, some of it isn't going to like even make it to the surface before you get accepted or not. And I applied at Temple and got in. And at that point, it was one of the 5 most expensive private schools in the country. And remember, I was paying for it. And so suddenly I'm like, well, I'm in. But how could I possibly afford this? And so the next thing I did was I applied for a naval scholarship. So there's a huge Navy in Philadelphia at the time. And so like literally they get me in a week for the application. And, like I go through a physical exam, there's all sorts of stuff. And so this is 1989. This is before either of you was even born. And they take me through all this stuff and, you can't be above 6'2" at that point because they're thinking about putting you on a sub and all sorts of other things. And they're like, well, we're gonna accept you. We're gonna offer to pay for 4 years of medical school, and then you'll owe us 6 in exchange.
6 years.
6 years. And, some of that might be residency. It might or may not count. And so I thought that was really interesting. And they said, but you need glasses. And this is 1989. And I'm like, why do I need glasses? And so I always laughed that they told me I needed glasses, if you've noticed. And about 3 years ago, I suddenly was like, I can't read very well, and I got glasses.
First exam, and I'm like, oh, yeah, it's finally happened. And I really feel bad for the guy who gave me the exam because my sister prepped me. My sister's an optometrist, so she prepped me with optometrists are all thieves. They're just trying to sell you glasses. So I went into Costco, because that's where I was getting my exam. And, I told him, I said, you guys are all thieves. The guy gets through the exam. I didn't put it in those words, right? I said, I have a sister, and he says, well, and he gets through the exam. Really nice guy. And at the end, he said, well, I just do exams here. Costco sells the glasses. I have nothing to do with it. Anyway, I also attacked my dentist.
Also thieves.
Yes. That's what I was going with.
Yeah.
So, you this is pretty big, right? You're like completely pivoting to some degree, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was what I was hoping for. I mean, like I had a possible contract to sign with DuPont set. And they knew that I was applying and that I was thinking about something else and that I was sort of waiting. And if I didn't get in any of the medical schools, I would have signed that contract and ended up in Delaware or wherever the hell it was. I don't even remember anymore. That might have, I think that was. Everything's in Delaware.
It was engineering? What kind of engineering?
Mechanical engineering.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely different angle.
Different. Yeah, very different. And so I dropped them immediately as soon as I got the naval scholarship. But so then I got home and it was like Thanksgiving break, and I have a few other places I'm waiting to hear from, and I'm going to be in the Navy, and I have a hard time not telling people to. I'm not a good subordinate. Let's put it that way.
My dad did mandatory military service in Egypt, and he always tells the story about he was in medical school at the time, and so because he was a medical person, he was usually finding like workarounds around basic drills and stuff like that. But did you end up doing it?
No, I dropped it after I got into Arizona about 3 months later. It had something where you didn't have to like formally accept it until they paid. Yeah. And so that was the nice thing. And I mean, literally, I think that at that time, Temple was about $50,000 a year. And this is 1990, and Arizona was 6. I mean, that was the difference. Right. And so it was, I can scrounge up 6, or I can borrow money.
What was it like telling the Navy that you weren't going to do it anymore?
Oh, that was easy.
You just said, hey, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. Thank you, but no.
You hadn't signed anything like contractual, or there was no battle.
It wasn't, it was not at that point where it was forced at that point.
It's interesting that you gave Temple that same, like, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. When I was applying for sub-Is, I got accepted for a sub-I at Temple. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. And I put all the paperwork in. And then I got accepted for a sub-I at Baylor. And then I was like, no, thanks.
So Temple's used to it.
Temple's used to urologists be like, what? They've got a really good program now, though, so I hope that...
And sub-I is a sub-internship. That's what you do between medical school and residency, in case people don't know.
Is that generally with the concept of then applying for a particular residency, like that sub-I is going to get you somewhere?
Yes. They don't do them in medicine? Acting internships?
Some people do. Usually it's like anesthesia, like you do this first year where it's like
a transition year.
Right.
Yeah.
So with a sub-I, it's sort of like it was like a month, almost always a month, and you would go to whatever program, and they treated you like you were an intern, so you got to do some things, which was a little more than you got to do as a medical student, and you got to kind of get the flavor of the place to see, is this where I would want to spend several years? In urology, it's 5 or 6. Do I want to be with people like this? And so it's good for both the place and for you to figure out.
Yeah, so if you don't get enough exposure during medical school to commit, like this is what I really want to do, and you still want to kind of get a feel for it, you get a kind of free testing ground without full committal. But before you even get into that, so now we're
Let's back up to college again.
Are we in medical school now? We're going to go into Arizona.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we're in there, and if I miss something big, feel free. We're
So,
in medical. Yeah, go ahead.
Here's a great story: is that as I start medical school at Arizona, my mom, who I mentioned, started a travel agency. Her partner in the travel agency was a woman who had a son who was about 4 or 5 years older than me. And he was graduating from Arizona Medical School as I was starting, and he was going into urology. And I said, what is wrong with this guy that he wants to play with urine all the time? And I only knew him a little bit, and I made fun of him pretty aggressively as I got into medical school, because I knew I wanted to do ortho, because, that sounded fun.
So your dad's ENT. What sparked ortho before you even started medical school?
I think that some of my friends' parents were orthopedics. They got paid very well. They did a lot of sports kind of thing, and I thought that was kind of fun. They were always involved with tennis and skiing and the basketball team. So it seemed like a cool thing, and they got to do surgery, and I liked that idea. I have no idea what they did at that point, but not really. And so as I entered medical school, I knew that's what I probably wanted to do. I mean, it was probably worth looking at other stuff, but I knew where I'd end up.
Right. So you're looking at ortho, and this guy wants to play with private parts.
Oh, I just knew it was urinology. I thought he was like a nephrologist. I thought he just looked at urine. I had no idea what it was. And I didn't for my first 2 years of medical school. I had no idea what urology was.
And it's kind of fair. In your first couple of years, it's all just such general information anyway. It's now I think a lot of it is systems based that so it's not like you learn all of this and then all of that. And then now I think it's you probably do urology, whatever in your first year, but you do
you have a better idea.
All at once rather than histology is a year, kind of thing. And it's a little bit of whatever. Those are all the different systems that they're doing.
And I think urology was just a small portion of a last block relating to for my medical school, from what I remember. And then we didn't learn and then they had the histology side and all that kind of stuff, but it didn't get any kind of real attention because it was just so small. At least they didn't mention it in my medical school. And then even when you were rotating through, they didn't really give it much attention.
Okay, I gave the urology lectures at times here.
You did?
Well, it was at the end of my nephrology talk or whatever.
So it was the same setup?
And I would talk about different approaches for surgery for stones. I'm I think that's a piece there's something going on there. But yeah, you're right. There's very little from the wrong people.
Well, it's from somebody. And I think to give the level of information necessary for medical school, I think that's more than sufficient, right? Because you just have to understand the basic concepts. You don't have to have medical students understand the reality of hitting the pleura when you're going to above the 12th rib. They don't really. Unless it shows up on a step question. I don't know.
Who knows anymore? No. I think step 1 has now become pass-fail, apparently.
Yeah, it has.
So there's some evolution to this, which I don't know if that's good or bad. Step 1 is not actual real medicine anyways.
Right, it was the books, the chemistry book.
Yeah, it was easily, my best step, and it was because it was chemistry, right? It was I don't know that it really helps you with talking to people.
Orthopedics to urology.
So during my first year of medical school, you had an opportunity to, as a medical student, you could say, hey, I'm interested in this or that, and they would try and help you either shadow or spend a day with somebody to get an idea. And so there was somebody who did kind of surgery in general, and he would help hey, there's a couple of guys that are in private practice that do orthopedics, and they said if anybody was interested to call them. And so I think I had called an orthopod that was just had a little office somewhere and said, hey, I'd really like to hang out and maybe go to the operating room or something with you. And it was probably about 3 months into medical school, and it was a Saturday. And like this guy was like very excited to have somebody that might be interested in orthopedics. And so he brought me to the operating room, and like someone had broken their leg. And so he was drilling something in a pin of something. And he had a partner there. And he's like, oh, here, you drill this in. And he'd show me where. And you would go, bzzz. And he's like, wasn't that fun? And you're like, yeah. I didn't think it was fun. And I was like, oh, God. They were super excited about, like, they had to put in, like, 4 pins on each side of whatever metal thing they were fixing. And they were super excited. And after I had done a couple, they're like, oh, let me do something. I mean, like, they loved what they were doing, which was nice to see, but it was super boring to me. And then the best part was that we did one more case, and they were doing something with a knee. The main guy that I was with was like, okay, I want to put this at a 17-degree angle. And the other guy's like, 19. And they started like screaming at each other. And I was like, yeah, this isn't the right thing for me, which was really depressing. It was super depressing. And I was like, well, now what the hell am I going to do? I'm like, I know I like surgery, and I know there's a lot of things in surgery. And so then it was sort of exploring, well, now I have to get off my butt and really try and find, like you don't really know all these things. And then I find out that there's neurosurgery, and we had done some neurology at that point in medical school, and I was like, wow, that might be interesting. So I thought, oh, I'll look at neurosurgery, and then there's general surgery, and general surgery includes like colon stuff and transplant stuff, and they have all sorts of different little parts there that you could check out, and I think that it was sort of, that was the start. And so I went and I spent a little time with each of those type things. And in fact, between my first and second year of medical school, I did a research project on temporal lobe surgery for seizures with a neurosurgeon. And I thought it was really interesting. Like, neurology is sort of like, it's electrical, it's all connections. Like, the idea of it was very interesting, but the day-to-day was not. When I hung out with them and realized that, like, you see the residents who are working, and they're working hard. And this was before they had duty hour restrictions, and so, like, they were at the hospital 15 hours every day, the residents. And then I was looking at their bosses, and they were at the hospital 14 hours every day. Like, their lives were no better. And I was like, oh, maybe this isn't it. And their ego, they were probably the biggest egos that I had ever seen at that point, till I met a heart surgeon. And that really turned me off. And so, like, in fact, I was so excited that my best friend in medical school at that point, I was telling him about how cool neurosurgery was and this and that. He ended up going into it.
So I think there's something there where you had this recognition that most people, I think, miss. And what I mean by that is you started looking at quality of life while you were in medical school, seeing these hours and how they were working. So most people are blinded to this, and they think, oh, well, that's what I like, and this is cool, and oh, I can work that many hours, and oh, I can study, because it's a selected breed of people who endure this kind of pain all along. They don't really have this foresight. My wife is one of them who, emergency medicine, oh yeah, this is really cool, but what does that life really look like outside of this or after this? People don't think that far ahead. And part of it, I think, is like, you had, your father.
I was going to say, so my dad, as an ear, nose, and throat, while I said he wasn't around that much, in comparison to a lot of other doctors' kids, he was around all the time. Looking at the orthopods who are always working or always on vacation on skiing or something, because they made so much money, that he was around a fair amount. And so it made me realize that, I don't only want to do medicine. Like, I want to have the life as well. But I also had the idea of, I like the concept of surgery over non-surgery because it felt like you'd solve a problem. And like general surgery was very much like, hey, someone comes in and they have pain here, you operate and remove that, and then their pain's gone and you're done and you never have to see them again. Yeah. And like for some people that's good. I talk a lot, and so I need a little bit of follow-up with people. So
yeah, I think it's unique, right? It's not all surgeons, fall under that path where they like talking to their patients and all that kind of stuff. The joke I always make with my patients is like, yeah, I talk about stuff, but the urologists are the ones that actually fix it. Right? I'm always trying to differentiate between nephrology and urology, so they stop asking me urology questions, right? So this is generally what I do. Oh, you have pain? Not me.
I don't know, go away.
But it's an important point because I always kind of felt like, well, I'm never really going to figure. Okay, well, I have this dialysis machine here, though. Okay, I can, I'm doing something there, but you almost feel like you want that finite thing of like, yeah, I'm fixing this, right? Like lowering somebody's blood pressure is not, as good of a feeling as relieving a stone pain or whatever it is, something like that. It's silent killers versus obvious pain, right?
Neurology was the big thing that sort of showed that to me. I think I realized that neurology, they would go and see someone who had had a stroke and they could, examine them and figure out exactly where in the brain the problem was, and then get an x-ray, get a CT scan that proved they were right. But then they were done and they couldn't do anything else about it. Take some aspirin or whatever. And then the neurosurgeons, they were there all the time, and like I didn't see them help a lot of people. And so it fell off the list very quickly. And so as I kept trying different things, you'd be like, well, maybe. And so it was a little concerning during medical school that I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. And then as a third year medical student, the way that we did it back in my day was that we did 2 years of like book science and then 2 years of like in the hospital sub-doctor sort of thing. And third year was a little bit of, you do about 8 weeks in surgery, and it might be 6 weeks of general surgery and 2 weeks of a specialty or something along those lines. But you did that, you did OB, you did all sorts of different things. And I saw a surgeon that I thought, wow, this is one of the most amazing surgeons I've ever seen. Really good with his hands, and like he seemed very slick and knew what he was doing, but not like a used car salesman kind of slick, but like really skilled and confident in himself. And I really liked it. And he was a gynecologic oncologist. So he finished OB/GYN training, which is like 4 years, and then did 2 or 3 more years of a fellowship just in the cancer side. And these are big surgeries. And he was really impressive. And so I was like, I guess that would be what I'd want to do. And so toward the end of third year, I was, well, I guess that's what I'm probably going to do. And the depressing part was that it was fun to deliver babies, but their hours are not great. And 4 years of delivering babies just to get to the 3 years of what I wanted to do was daunting. Yeah. And my wife, who was a year behind me in medical school, was like, you really seem to enjoy the 2 weeks you did on urology. And I said, I did? I didn't remember. Oh, yeah, that was kind of fun. Literally, this is at the end of my third year.
Where does she come into your life? I know we kind of skipped through some things.
So as I was starting my second year of medical school, there was this new epidemic that really came out, and it was called AIDS. And so as one of the medical students, one of the fun things you could do is that there are about, 15 of us maybe, that had sort of thought, you know what, we should go out to the high schools, the rural high schools in Arizona. That might be 4 or 6 hour drive.
Considering where this started.
Well, and so we should explain. Like at that point, people were like, oh, I don't want to be in the same room with somebody who has AIDS because I don't want to get it. And it was a No. Like, as long as you're not sharing needles with them, it's safe. And like, it was just basic AIDS education. And so we were going to go to high schools, and we did this. And so we did it around town in Tucson. But then you could also go to like some of the Native American areas that are 4 or 6 hours away up near the Grand Canyon. And the university would supply you with a van. And so we would like take a van up, and we'd camp, and it was great. They paid for gas, they paid for the whole thing. And so we had this group that was the AIDS education. And my second year, I was one of the people in charge, and my wife joined, and we met that way. And then like a couple months later, we started dating, and it was just coincidentally through a sort of extracurricular activity that the medical school offered. That was a terrible story. I can't believe I told it.
No, that's a great story. I thought it was.
I still remember. Yeah, no, I still remember.
No. High school, and I asked you, where'd you meet your wife? And I was like,
No. I still remember the first time you told me that story after a comedy show. I think because we were talking about like living out of the van and lifestyle choices and stuff like that, and that's probably the best way to get to know somebody, right? Is in that kind of experience, that kind of environment where it's low stress in terms of who's providing, and then you get to really just talk about each other, talk to each other. And
well, it was nice. It was, we had a campfire. We cooked in front of it. There were like 8 of us. We had a bunch of tents. I mean, it was, and they paid for us to do that. Yeah. It was great.
Well, by the time I got to medical school, they wouldn't even pay for my ride to Orlando to go volunteer at the Disney Marathon. I feel like I caught medicine right when all the cool stuff and all the cool fads. We talked to somebody who was, at the height of the Viagra sales and stuff like that. And things, right? Like the things that they would do, and you saw it too.
Oh,
so
I was 14 in 1989. A little ahead of him.
You were born. Okay.
Yeah. So back to the story, right? So this person who you got to know in a wonderful setting that's allowed for a lot of, good experiences and interactions, she tells you that, hey, you actually liked urology those 2 weeks.
And the interesting thing was that when she said it, I looked back, I'm like, oh yeah, that was really interesting, because it was all these different things. And like, I didn't, even then, like even in 3rd year of medical school, I really didn't know what urology was. And I mean, I knew what a prostate was and stuff, but I didn't realize kind of, they do kidney stones, they do testicle surgery, they do all sorts of different things. At that point, they were doing transplants. And so it was just this, like every day was a completely different field almost. And so, and they were the biggest jokesters in the hospital. And I understood that.
Well, I've met you obviously much later on, but I was like, yeah, that, it fits. Like,
you are a urologist.
This is a recurring theme, like in urology that I've seen it. There are some other people here that I would say are certainly not there. That I wouldn't consider jokesters in any way, actually, and they're all in your division.
Part of figuring out what you want to do is figure out what you want to do for a long time, so it's interesting to you, and that you don't hate going to work every day, and is stimulating mentally or physically or both, and that, I found that I was lucky enough to figure it out before I applied for residency. But I mean, I've seen the numbers, and it says that like 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 people change what they do. And so you don't have to feel like you've set yourself on a permanent path. There's a lot of variations. And even in urology, which is a tiny field in comparison to so many, inside there's like 6 or 7 different paths you can follow. And so you can change, and in fact, we'll get into it, but I changed very drastically 14 years into practice.
So yeah, and I do want to get into that, but before you even get into urology, we're talking about surgery, right? Doing surgeries, right? But urology there's a lot more to that. So one of the appeals I had towards OB actually was you do surgery, then you do inpatient rounding, then you do clinic, and you're influential and follow these people long term, and when they're younger to when they're older, in these long-term relationships. And also, it's a generally younger population, and you feel like there's improvements and outcomes that are good. Partially saying this because of something my father had said to me at one point that still sticks a little bit is, oh, you want to do nephrology? That is So basically, you're not going to do anything but watch people like decline.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, this is a pulmonologist, right? Not replacing any lungs. So what do you think? Anyway, what I'm getting at is you've talked about surgery, but then there's all these other parts, right? So you talk about the humor, and as a urologist, you're involved in basically being the confidence builder for a lot of these people whose confidences have been broken based on their disease or problem that they're dealing with, because they're probably ashamed of it, or maybe not. But there's a lot more here socially, and that you need to navigate and be welcome to, or else it's only going to go good for you in the OR, right?
That's true. No, that's a really good point.
I don't know if you were feeling or looking into any of that at the time. I think you have the perfect personality for it, but I don't know that you knew that.
I don't know that I knew that at the point. I mean, I knew that I liked to be, class clownish, and maybe I didn't want to be the center of attention, but I didn't mind, especially for a quick laugh and then fade out to something else. But I did find that the only other people in the hospital that were vaguely like that, they were urologists, And so it was sort of a feeling of fitting in that ended sort of choosing that for me. But you did have a lot of options to sort of get there.
And what's interesting is so people have, aha moments, or think, oh, this is where I belong, right? But your wife had to open your eyes for you. Right?
Completely. I think that maybe I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and the pressure of trying to decide that was enough that I didn't recognize what was obvious to other people.
Right. You were blinded in the
Right. I was looking so closely at different things.
Still ortho reminiscing, right? It's maybe I can make that work, right? There's still...
And I think I was with the OB kind of, you have to do some surgery, and, in the 4 years of residency, I think to deliver babies for 18 months, and you do surgery for 12, and it's clinic for half a year or something along those lines vaguely. But it was, I'm not going to enjoy the deliveries for the most part. They'll be fun for a little while, but not for very long, especially at midnight and 2 a.m.
No, but this is great foresight. Most people don't have this, right? They're just they're delivering babies. They don't think about 2 a.m. Babies are always 2 a.m, right?
I think it's interesting because I had a similar path where I considered gynecology because pelvic surgery, and I considered it specifically because gyn-onc. And at that time, I was still interested in uro-onc. And they did pelvic examinations. They were working together. And I had an intimation I wanted to be a urologist. But then I delivered one baby. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Maybe this is it. Then I delivered the second baby, and I was just like, it's already worn off. Right? And so since that baby,
I decided.
But then the midwife asked me if I would deliver my son. And I was just like, wait a minute, maybe I should have been delivering those babies. But then they let me do it anyway. But I think it's interesting because you also mentioned that feeling of belonging. And then we also mentioned this idea of you were really reaching and you're really trying to get at finding the thing. And we earlier talked about in a different conversation, and we know about this feeling. When you watch somebody when they're really nervous and they get trapped in the nerves, and it's just an endless rebound of oh my God, what do I do? And in that feeling, the stress is so high that you don't see what's obvious.
Yeah.
Right?
And so I took my wife to go, you liked that, and I'm trying to convince myself I'm going to apply and spend the next 7 years getting to where I want to be. And she's like, you like that other thing? And I just didn't see it. And then as my third year ended, fourth year medical school had virtually no requirements. It was a lot of, you had to do something for 30 of the 44 weeks or something. That was it. And so it was, okay, well, I'm going to immediately go and I'm going to do 4 weeks of GYN oncology and 4 weeks of urology back to back. And that's going to choose what I do. And so at my main hospital in Tucson, I did just back-to-back 4-week blocks of those. And I really, really liked the person that I was watching operate with the GYN oncology. And I could picture being that person. But those were terribly sad stories. The surgeries were amazing. This was one of the few surgeons that was I don't need anybody else to help me. If there's a problem with the heart, I will fix it. If there's a problem with the lungs, I can operate on that. If you want me to take out a bladder because it's attached to whatever tumor there is on that ovary, I'm taking it out. I don't need a urologist. I don't need anybody else. Like, this guy was really impressive. And he was probably a little bit of a cowboy and maybe overly aggressive. But the sad thing was that most of his patients were like these 30-year-old women. You know, like, this was their last chance to live. You know, and so there was all this sadness. And then there was these jokesters in urology. And I realized, why am I going to do 4 years of delivering babies to get to this depressing place if I could just tell jokes for 4 years? Because penis jokes are hilarious.
It's interesting how, like, selecting that is, the social side. I don't know that there's another specialty that the social side of it is such a driver.
Such a weird.
I mean, like, I can't think of it. I mean, there's certain personalities for, like, general surgery, but they're not, like, very unique, right?
And I think that sense of belonging was something that I felt it early on, because and we talked about this recently, coming back from Phoenix from the World Congress, that first feeling of going to a conference and being like, wow, look at all these other people that are just as interested in this really small thing that I'm interested in. You know, and it felt a bit like, I don't know, but I've never been to Comic-Con, those kinds of, but like you would imagine, like in the movies, they show us like, oh my God, look at all these other people that like what I like. You know, but then for it to be your profession and to be something that was similar to Gynonc, that had that kind of seriousness, it really, I mean, it pulled me into it. And now here we are, you know, 8 years later, we're still going to conferences and things like that, right?
And the interesting thing was that you feel very stressed in that I'm starting my 4th year of medical school. All these other people know what they want to do. And you think everybody else knows. And then later you find out that nobody knew what they wanted to do, or very few, but you had to apply. And so, you know, like, I had to get in my application. Urology was early match, meaning that you had to turn in your paperwork 3 months before everybody else. And so, like, I finished my 4 weeks of urology, and then it was, I got to start applying. And then I did 4 weeks in Atlanta, a program there. And I think that was the only sub-I did.
Really? You did one? Yeah.
Yeah, it was too expensive.
Did that stress you out
back
too?
in the day? No,
Yeah.
that was fun. But it was more, oh yeah, these are my people. You know, like hanging out with these guys that were amazing. My sub-I, so I went away to Emory in Atlanta. So I lived there for a month, and I knew nobody. And there was another medical student who was doing the same. And his name was Willie Underwood. And he had lived in Atlanta. And so he knew some places and was going to help show me around. And we became, like, even though we were sort of competing for the job, we also became friends. And so, like, we see each other at conferences, and it's just fabulous to see him.
Can I just ask a quick question? Because we glossed over this, but Willie Underwood's business name, I mean, right there is urology. Willie Underwood? No, does his business skyrocket because of it? No?
I'm not going to answer that question. But so I spent 4 weeks in Atlanta and, you know, became friends with somebody. But in addition, like, you're acting as this intern with the urology and all these people I don't know. And immediately their sense of humor was, yeah, I'm with the right people. And that was very satisfying.
And it's great. I'm glad you found it, right?
And it was lucky. I don't know that everybody, yeah.
That's the scary part, right? Like, you know, you can get locked into all kinds of debt and not be happy. So you're in, at this point, you're applying and going into urology.
Right.
You're kind of figuring it out already, so this is great. Like, because some people are probably doubting themselves even after they're entering residency.
For sure.
Now, the clinic side of things, and like, I don't know how well it filters. You guys can tell me better, right? So what I picture is there are, you know, people who are coming in and they have, you know, problems with like sperm counts, and then there's people with like adult bedwetting, and it's all over the place, right? And some of these things are like, hey, I can surgically fix this, and other things are like counseling.
So in medical school and residency, you're almost 80+% in the operating room, or taking care of people in the hospital who are recovering from surgery or maybe need surgery. And so you do very little clinic. And so I was amazed when I finished my training in urology, when I went out and started doing it, that it's like, I don't know a lot of this stuff. I mean, it was my first year after finishing 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 6 years of urology residency. And then I was like, I don't know a lot of this stuff.
And then this is kind of everywhere. I've said this to, I can't tell you how many medical students, their exposure to nephrology is they go to the inpatient service and they run around the hospital and they see people in the ICU. I do that for like maybe 20% of my job, tops, right? 80% of the time I'm in clinics or dialysis units, like nobody ever sees that, right? But this is the exposure. Everybody just sees the most acute, sickest, busiest, whatever services, and it's hard to figure out what is the actual job, right? So through residency, was that pretty smooth? You shaken at points about like decisions?
Did I mention that when I got the naval scholarship, I was a little worried because I'm not a good subordinate? I had some rough days with my chairman. And in fact, my last year I was on probation with him, and he threatened not to graduate me at one point. So yeah, it was a little stressful as I was finishing up.
So, I mean, this speaks to, I'm going to say surgery, but I guess you could say medical residencies as well, is that there's a natural structure or a hierarchy, right? Now, in the medical world, it's a lot softer. Let's just leave it at that. In the surgical world, and is more of the television glorified version that I think has been maintained.
You've seen Scrubs, yeah?
Yeah.
It's Scrubs. Right? It's Scrubs.
Yeah, realist depiction of medicine I've ever seen in that.
We totally agree.
We've got to update it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. We'll see.
Make it for the times.
So, here you are, and you've got, I mean, this is internship residency. You are the lowest on the totem pole. You're, the term Scott monkey, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It's like you do all the jobs nobody else wants to do, so other people can get the glory and have the fun, the actual surgery, this, that, and the other, and indirectly, you may or may not be learning something doing that, or at least you're told you are.
So, like, I usually will, and things have changed, but I think a lot of the first year or two of surgical training is sort of learning how to take care of patients who are recovering or heading to surgery, and kind of being able to figure out who's really sick, who needs immediate attention, and maybe you need to grab one of your senior residents. And a little bit is how to save people and who need instant, to be able to just look at somebody and be like, this person is going to get very sick in the next half hour if we don't do something. And so I think a lot of the first couple of years was a lot of that. And it was strictly, and it wasn't like there's a class and you read something. It was by watching, why was my chief resident freaked out about this guy who looks the exact same as that one? But sure enough, that guy, tried to die.
This is really tough stuff, right? So this, I'm a nephrologist, so I love my numbers, right? But you step away from the numbers and this person looks sick. They're not going to make it through the night. They may need to get intubated, move them to a higher level of care. My wife is really good at this, thank God. She's an emergency medicine physician, but she just knows the sick look. And I can tell you that she has some colleagues that
don't have it.
They just don't have it. It's not a matter of experience. They have experience. They just never. It's like me drawing blood. My mother tried to teach me. Everyone's tried to teach me how to draw blood. I drew all my bloods as a medical student just to try to learn and bond with my patient. I suck. Everybody tried to teach me. I'm not good at it. Oh, do you really feel? I don't feel anything. I'm sticking them over and I just gave up, right? Some people just cannot be taught. And I'm clearly one of them when it comes to certain things. I can put a central line in, no problem. Dialysis catheter, fine. No, not threatening any. But this whole recognizing sick thing, sometimes it's not even experience, but it is really something that's important that you get it or you don't, right?
In urology, it's you're not moving on until you can understand that. Somebody had quoted something just recently, I think today, was a good doctor knows how to operate, a better doctor knows when to operate, and the best doctor knows when not to operate. And it was I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. And I think that that's part of the training, was trying to learn your way into that. And a lot of it is just repetition. And so it's just seeing enough patients and seeing the ones that don't do well, and just what is it that you recognize. And it may not even be something that you consciously know, but just that's the one that's going to turn south. That's the one that's going to do poorly. We got to do something.
Yeah, and we're always like posed with a consult or a question. It's like, what do you want to do? And I think there's this natural feeling that you then need to fix or do something, right? And early career for me, I was always trying to do something, and now I'm 16 years in, and I say things like, the right answer is to aggressively do nothing, right? Because you can.
I'm a huge proponent,
right?
Am I not? Benign neglect.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. You have to know when to leave people alone. Yeah. I mean, I remember we used to get blood tests on everybody every single day, and the question was, don't do a test unless you think it might change your management of what you're doing, and so have a plan. But just drawing a bunch of blood tests every day doesn't do you a favor. And then I remember one of the residents I was with was always trying to be like, oh my God, their potassium's just a point too low, and so I'm going to give them some, and I'm like, he'll be fine. He came in like this, he'll be fine.
Again, later career, I started saying and doing is I'll tell people I'm with, okay, you're going to see this person today. Oh, you want to draw these letters? Okay, and every day. Imagine this person had to reach in their pocket, take their wallet out, take $20 out and give it to you for this test and your interpretation of it. Did you need it or didn't you need it? Was it I get what you're saying about is it going to change your management? That's all true. But I try to get it more granular. Imagine they actually had to pay you cash for this. Would you be able to take that money with a good conscience? Because it was useless for what you just did. But I think that's a larger part of, I'm going to say, experience or maturity, is to know confidently when to just do nothing, right?
Yep.
All right, so we've done a lot of nothing. No.
We've done a lot of nothing.
You did 2 years of general surgery to start, right?
Yeah, so back in my day. So in the old days, it was 2 years of general surgery, and you were a general surgeon. You were expected just to do general surgery. So, I did heart surgery. I did all those sort of things. And then you abruptly changed at the end of your second year into urology, and you were thrown into this completely different world, because instead of knives and cutting people open and playing with things like their guts, it was, here's a camera, stick it in a hole and see what you can see. And you're like, I don't even know how to put this together. And literally the first month was put this together repeatedly so that you can do it without thinking about it.
There are many cystoscopes. There are many like it, but this one is mine. I never actually asked you this question, and it might change a lot of my perception of this phase. Did they have cameras for the cystoscopes at that time?
They were just getting them.
So the first time you did a cystoscopy in the OR?
No, most of the time that we would look in, you had your eye directly on the eyepiece.
Oh my God, I didn't realize that's how you trained in that. Man.
I've seen that in medical school where I was rotating through urology.
Yeah.
And I was shocked by the amount of splashage that was occurring.
Yeah.
Because of your proximity.
Denstedt, when he was the visiting professor, when I was a fellow, he showed us one of the images of this early technological advance, and it was essentially a water shield that you could wear on your face, and it was like a hood with eyepieces to protect the cystoscopic operator. Clearly, it didn't take off. We found a different solution. But because we were just talking this whole morning about teaching holo, what was the biggest challenge in that teacher-student relationship when you can't even see the same thing at the same time?
Well, so remember that they were just coming out with the camera so that you could see it on the screen. Uh-huh. And so probably at least 2/3 of what we did was on the screen. But occasionally we would be doing surgery, and the guy would be like, okay, I'm going to do the first things. Okay, now see what I did? And you're like, no. Sort of like you with, what was it there?
Well, we have our microscopes. Before they had the double-headed microscope, the pathologists would tell you they saw something. Then you look and you don't see anything.
So, I mean, so my wife's a heart doctor. I've never heard anything with the stethoscope. Yeah, I can hear like a normal lub dub or whatever it is, and they're like, "Do you see that extra?" I'm like, "No."
Not even with Kentucky and Tennessee. That didn't clarify Tennessee. I still can't do that.
But so it was kind of scary that you know, they're like, "Okay, now you, okay, me, now you," and you're like, "I don't know."
Still see eyelashes. Still see eyelashes.
Well, you know, and so you're like, I'm trying. Do I close this side? Do I close this side? Yeah, the Navy said I needed glasses.
But big transition. You're doing big general surgery things, cutting with knives, and now all of a sudden, telescopes. Some of it was on a screen.
Yeah, and so complete abrupt change between after 2 years of general surgery, and after 2 years of general surgery, you think you're the smartest person in the entire hospital, no question. There's nobody that I can't save. There's no problem that I can't solve. As the end of my second year of general surgery, yeah, that was the peak of my intelligence. Absolutely.
In the medical world, it's the same thing. 30-year residents know everything. Nobody knows it. But then when you're actually attending, that was that whole pretending conversation.
Oh yeah, we had last time.
This one more. Let me call the consultants there before you're actually it.
No, everything. Like there was no problem I couldn't solve. And then you, like, literally the very next day was, here's a scope. And you're like, how do you put it together? They're like, get back to us when you figured it out. You're on your own. Goodbye.
Wow.
You know, like, and so you're like, I don't know. It was crazy. Huh?
Did you break any?
Oh my God. Yeah, we broke tons of them.
And you can't just Google it and YouTube it, right?
That didn't exist.
Like, it's not an option, is what I'm getting at this time, right?
The guy that invented Google wasn't even alive yet.
Yeah.
That's how old I am.
This is going to sound bad, but the first time I remember doing an nephrectomy here as a young attending, pretending, I was like, wait a minute, I haven't fired the stapler in like a year and a half. And I was like, oh. And then I went on YouTube and I found a video and I was like, okay, then it's good. And then I looked at it in the opera and I was like, oh, that's what I remember. And I did it, right? But like that didn't, you know, there's the Nick. If you watch the Nick, there's there's, in one of the sequences, they're operating and they have the textbook open. And they're just like, wait, what is it? And then they're like operating and things like that. And they're like, wait a minute, did you have that French journal? And then they open, it's like, oh no, it's in French. And so they can't finish the surgery. But like, it's one of those things.
What does a French appendix look like?
But big transition, and you had to adjust. Did you end up finding somebody that what resources finally, started lining up to help?
Honestly, so like, as an intern, I learned how important the other people in the operating room were. So like early on, it was just the other trainees, the ones ahead of me, and my attending that. And then there were nurses, and they were talking, but I wasn't really paying that much attention to them. And what I learned was they could be your best friend. And so like just by being nice to other people in the operating room, they were like they would just give you a lot of hints. Like they had years of experience of seeing somebody struggle. And instead of inventing the wheel again, like they knew the steps and they were quick enough to tell me. Whereas my co-resident, who was a foreign grad and didn't speak English that well and was sort of a little cold and aloof, I don't know how he figured it out. He was way behind. And so I hadn't really thought about that in 30 years. But yeah, so I became kind of friendly with the surgical techs, and like, when the attending would be like, grab the glockenspiel, and you'd be like, what the hell's and they're like, and so like they were looking out for me all the time. And
you get along with the dialysis nurses, your life is going to be a whole lot easier, right? We joke about it all the time, but it's so true, right? That they have these people, and it's not even just like, it's probably more the standoffish aloofness than even like English or, foreignness or whatever it is that probably created that barrier.
Yeah.
Because, if not, you're on your own. You're out there.
Yeah. And I think that just being somebody that treated everybody sort of more equal, like it was not, you're just a nurse, I'm going to treat you differently. It was, we're a team, and our enemy is my boss, whoever it is. Right. They're the enemy.
And, from what I know of you, I'd imagine there was some humor mixed in there, which is, the great disarmer, that makes people suddenly see you as not being over them because you're joking around with them. But I think it's a really important part, getting a rapid advance on that relationship with people. May go, are you going to yell? Because you probably have residents yelling at nurses, right? Which is the biggest mistake you could ever make.
Well, not only that, but it's almost unrecoverable. Like, there are things you can do or say that you can never recover from. And like, I have been lucky that I sort of recognize them, and I will joke right up to the level of the line, and I don't cross it. And I mean, people are amazed I have a job here because I will go right up to the line.
I still remember the one time as a resident, I yelled at a nurse, and my mom, she was a NICU nurse. And so and it was at the VA. And of course the nurse was Filipina, like my mom. And it was like 2 a.m. I was on the vascular surgery service. I was an intern, and they kept asking me if I would order labs for an ENT patient that wasn't mine. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then they called me a second time and asked me to do it. And I was like, I'm not going to do it. They called me a third time, and I just lit into this nurse at 2 a.m. And as soon as I hung up, I was like, why didn't I just order the labs? I should just order the labs. Because, you're dead. But like you said, there are things that you don't recover from. And I'm glad that it happened in that setting at 2 a.m. when it was literally just me in the call room. And I was just like, but now as a surgeon, there are those moments in the operating room when things aren't going right. And you're feeling that urge because everything feels stacked against you, right? And little bursts of it come, but the time that those bursts come out as a surgeon, it's one of those things. It's just like, how do you recover from this? And the solution I've found so far is duck donuts, warm donuts for the staff, right? And
bribe.
It's clearly for that
bribe.
Well, I think it's more of the acknowledgement, because I remember the one time that it did happen, and somebody called me out. She said, and I'm glad she said it this way. She said, Ali, you're really whining. And I was just like, you're so right. And then I apologized. And I think it was the only way that you really come back from that kind of moment is to acknowledge that, like, hey, I really shouldn't have crossed that line.
And a true apology will go a long way. I mean, a little humility. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, there are certainly doctors that think they're better than people and other things like that. And I think a lot of times it's more stress and they don't recognize that they've said or done something like that. But I tend to give people the credit of the doubt. Is that the term?
The benefit of the doubt.
Thank you.
It's the same case.
I had this one fellow who I remember the nurses were complaining to me. He doesn't put in any orders for dialysis. He just asks the nurses to put them in. He just says that, hey, verbal orders. Surgeons can get away with a lot more than medical people. And he had the best apology ever. He didn't really recognize that he was out of line, first of all. But what he said to some more of the senior nurses is he looked at them and said, I'm sorry, this is actually really not my fault. I grew up with 4 older sisters. I've never done anything for myself in my life.
Learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness.
He used to put his orders in.
Yeah.
Because he was the only boy and he had 4 older sisters. So he never. I can't believe you got away with it. But it was the best.
But I think that, in terms of like that realistic depiction in Scrubs, but also in The House of God, I think that's one of the themes that in much different terms and depictions. But that idea, and it's something we talked about, that if you're friends with the right people, then the job becomes easier. The job becomes better because we're working together. And so he was clearly leeching on that mechanism in a way. But I think benign neglect, right? That's what prevents that. It's like, no, I'm actually not going to pay attention to you doing that. Just do it. Put the orders in. I trust that you're going to put the orders in so that they don't, But sometimes I worry that I didn't get the same kind of experience that you both got in terms of recognizing life and death. Because I only had 3 months of urology, but I had 9 months of general surgery. And most of it was like lip service. So I never really developed it in as sharp a way. I know it's like, oh yeah, that erection that's lasted more than 4 hours might be more dangerous, right? I have that. But other than that, it's not as deeply developed. And so, you mentioned observing and watching, and that's really how you sort of learned it. And I feel like that's kind of what you were getting to in the OR, was you would observe and watch and learn from all the other resources around you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think to some extent that's true. And interestingly, I mean, so like ortho or ENT, back in my day, they did 1 year of general surgery and then went on to do their 4 years of ortho or ear, nose, and throat. And they were not sort of included as one of us as general surgeons. They were there, they're just here for a year, and so they didn't get to do stuff. And I think they did not have anything close to the same learning that I got by doing 2 years of general surgery, actually. And part of it was just you're part of the team, we're going to make sure that you learn. Whereas he's just here for a year, he doesn't even count.
But did you get to do like lab choles, lab appies kind of stuff?
Yeah.
And like you did them. Like I only did one inguinal hernia repair. And I did it skin to skin. And then did I tell you the story? The guy busted the stitches like 6 weeks later. I was like, because he went back to work. But like in terms of that in-depth experience, it's very interesting how, times change and training patterns become a little bit different.
I argued with some of our residents. I was telling them about how much I learned that first year out after residency. And I said, that the only year that was even vaguely close to learning in my entire life was that internship. And you guys have been through that. And I was telling this to the residents. I'm like, you've been through internship. You know what I'm talking about how much you learned. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, the hours were terrible. And you were not always treated very well. But you learned so much. And you got to do these surgeries and you got to do stuff. And they're like, no, we didn't get to do any of that. And what I learned was that my internship was very different than what it is now, where the interns do a lot more bookkeeping, electronic medical record work. And so like I was in the operating room every day as an intern pretty much. And now it's rare that they get in. And suddenly I realized, so you have terrible hours. And then the one thing that I thought got me through that terrible year was at least I was learning something in the operating room. They very rarely got any of that. And I was like, I retract my statement about how good internship was. Or it was for me, but it's not for you.
Yeah. I think, and that's the thing about when I switched from the intern year to my PGY2, as a urology intern, I got that experience where every day they were expecting me to be in the OR. And super thankful for that and they were constantly trying to get me to take on more and take on more and take on more. And I think that's one of the things about surgical training, but it also happens where it's like, there's no replacing that like live fire experience, like that live action, like, and you're with other people in this environment, learning the team, learning the flow kind of thing. So you did cystos. What about like bigger open surgeries, nephrectomies and cystectomies and things like that? What was the experience like there?
So we would do some of that as a junior resident, but usually it was you were the third person. So there was the attending who was teaching, the chief resident, and then you were also there. And maybe they'd let you do a part, but mostly you were watching. We weren't always so busy. And in a lot of residencies, they have a VA where they operate. And at that time, like the VA was really the senior resident was operating with you as a junior resident. You learned from them, and maybe they'd let you do everything, but they were sort of coaching you along the way. And so it was the best learning was actually being the senior resident and trying to teach a junior resident how to do something, because it showed you what you didn't know well enough to have somebody do. Like that was the best test there was, the best learning.
Well, seeing if you could teach it. See one, do one, teach one, right? Yeah. And like to be able to do that in residency was such, like, no matter how all the other bookkeeping and things like that, how beat down residency got me, what I always would come back to as like a mantra at the end of every hard day was, at least I was in the operating room today. And because it felt like at least I got on the field.
But I think that another way to look at it is like residency is very hard hour-wise, and it can be exhausting. And you're learning a lot during it. And so mentally you're tired. Your co-residents, even though you may never be in the operating room with them, you know that they're your partner and that they've got your back in some way. But you're a team or a family, and like you're all doing this together. And so residency, while I think it's kind of traumatic, is sort of amazing. You talk about, like, they talk about kind of people who are in the military who are in war become so close to the people that they're with, and it feels very similar to that.
Yeah. I think the thing about that level of bond, and because the only other people that I'm like this with is my family, where like
I don't like your family,
but like where texts, phone calls, digital replacements for contact, they just don't work. They're not like, I really don't know what I would text Hunter Fuentes, who was my PGY5 teaching me as a PGY4 how to operate at the VA. And I should get back in touch with him in a way, because we got really close. But it's just like, if I FaceTimed him, I wouldn't know what to say. I just, and it's kind of the same with family. But I think it's, like you said, that level of bond. Some of it has to do with the trauma of residency, but I think some of it also has to do with the growth. Like, you change so much every year.
Well, I mean, if I say to you, oh my gosh, I took out a kidney stone this big, you're like, whatever. Whereas if I say to one of my co-residents, hey, I had this, like, they have an understanding of what you've been through that's just different than other people. And so there's a way closer bond.
And they're putting it in context of things that have happened before or after, what you wanted,
right.
And they know all that stuff. You had mentioned something about your last year and, we'll say, conflict that may have, but it was interesting that it was your last year, right? Because now you're senior, so you're kind of in charge, right? Obviously, there's an attending there, but that's where you kind of hit the most conflict, right? It sounds like you were even threatened for graduation status, whatever that means. This is like you said when you were second year surgery. I know everything. I can do it right. Like, this is the I know everything of urology, I assume, when you got your fifth year. Oh, well, the attending wants to do this, but you know better, right? Like, you may do it because they said so, but you knew better, right?
Yeah. I mean, so like from the chairman who did prostate cancer surgery, what I learned was he does a really, really nice surgery that takes 2 hours longer than it should, and learning what do I skip, what corner can I cut to save some of that time that he is wasting that is not worthwhile. Yeah. And so so that, at the end of my chief year, that's where I was, but also with a lot of hatred and anger toward him.
Yeah, we've had this discussion before, but it's kind of like, I know better, I know everything, right? And to try to find a way to taper that down. Because you're on a long road, right? Undergrad and medical school and residency, whatever breaks in between. And then you've been at this for a while. This is not just like 1 year, I think I know everything, right? You're almost there.
Right.
And, you obviously are there now. And so did you finish residency? Where did you go to work after that?
So, you have to decide if you want to do a fellowship about a year and a half before you finish. And that's when you need to kind of decide what you want to do, because you have to apply a year in advance, sometimes a little more, rarely much less. So you have to have decided by then. And I knew during my residency, we did 8 months of research. We had an 8-month block of research. And I knew I don't want to do research. And I just want to go and do my thing that I've spent all these years learning how to do. I want to be the person doing the surgery, and I don't want to work in academics. While I want to kind of have this one-on-one with the patient and enjoy them and move on. And so I knew I wanted to go into practice. Back in the day, it was strictly either private practice or academics. There was nothing else. And so I didn't think I was ready to do any surgery that a urologist should be able to do. I could do it, no problem. The transplant, it was a little specialized because you had to have a place that they did the medication side of it. I was like, fine, I will give up transplant and not be in academics. I will go into private practice. And so I decided that. And so about 12 months before I graduated, I started interviewing for jobs. And at that point, we're in Tucson, and my wife had decided she wanted to do a fellowship and go somewhere for 3 years to do pediatric cardiology. And so we had a 2-year-old, I guess a 1-year-old at that point, 2 when we graduated. And there weren't a lot of places that she could be a mom and a fellow at the same time. And so she looked around like all over the country, and there were like 4 places. And she's like, we're going to go to Iowa City. We're going to go to Iowa. She was born and raised in Phoenix, never lived anywhere else. I was like, okay. And so Iowa City is kind of a smaller town, especially from Phoenix. And it is, I'll say it's 70,000 people, and that's probably pushing it. And so way smaller. The university was there. And then there was one private practice of 3 guys at the one little hospital across the river from the university. And then there was a town about 25 minutes north there was a group of, I don't know, 10 or 15 urologists, and they could take somebody. And then there was a group an hour away, and they were always looking for somebody. And so I was talking to those 3 groups. That was it. I didn't want to do academics. I knew that this is where I wanted to go. And out of the blue, somebody is like, I live 2 hours away from Iowa City, but I own a plane. I will pick you up every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday and fly you back home at the end if you'll. And so I was like, where did this come from? It was terrible. He ended up dying in his plane. Glad I didn't take that job. But so he wasn't in the Navy. But so it was, hey, if you're going to work at the University of Iowa, and if I work at this hospital that's 30 miles away, we'd have to live literally right in between. And the one that's an hour, I'm not sure what we would do. I'd probably have to rent a place whenever I was on call and stay. And so it was a little bit of that, and ended up finding that the group in Iowa City, the 3 guys, I ended up joining them. So I went into private practice, and which was everything. And that was children, adults, cancer, not cancer. I mean, everything was to be done.
So when you say children, so pediatric urology, there are pediatric urologists, so you don't have to do that.
You don't have to do that. I mean, and there's a few things that, they're so specialized that you have to send that to a pediatric urologist. And there were a few of them around. There was one at the University of Iowa. And so for really complex pediatric things, I would send that to him, but that was about it. Everything else I felt I could take care of.
So, and this is where
there were a couple of things that I'll tell you about. So residency was at least 85% surgery, perioperative care of patients in the hospital, and that was it. And very little clinic in residency. We would cover, like at the VA, which was a small amount of what you would do. You would see a bunch of people, and so that was actually an exposure to it. But vets are a very different breed of people than kind of the average person that comes into the urology clinic. And so it was a huge change to go from less than 15% clinic to, that's 80% of what you do. That's 3 solid days a week of clinic and 1.5 of surgery, maybe. You have to find them to have it. Looks like it.
But is that about when your clinic procedures start sharpening? Because I think you're one of the slickest I've seen in the clinic at procedures.
That was so hard. Yeah. So during residency, you're supposed to learn how to do vasectomy. Yeah. And so most surgery that you do in urology, the patient is asleep. And so it's easy to do something to somebody when they're asleep than to have them staring at you while you purposely hurt them. And so vasectomy was incredibly difficult for me. I think so. There's a couple of really big surgeries that we do where we're cutting things right off of the aorta, the main artery, and those are these huge surgeries, and that was great. I loved those. Those would be fun. But a vasectomy in the clinic was terrifying. And I remember my first one, and I'm sure that guy remembers it too. So you have to feel, and then you have to try and numb that up with a needle, so they jump, and and you pull back, and then you realize, I just pulled it out, now I got to stick him again. And so he's staring me in the face, and I was sweating so much. I think it took more than an hour.
Oh my God.
to do. And like, you have this tiny little hole and you're trying to work through this little hole, and it was awful. And I dropped part of the tube and it was bleeding, so I had to go and try and find it. And I'm trying to grab it because I see it's bleeding. It's just awful. This poor guy must have been like just rigid, holding himself still, and periodically I'm grabbing something, ow, yeah. and it was just awful. But I don't remember what we were talking about.
We were talking about, but now that you see that, put you way deep in the void of that, of like when things aren't going as expected.
Yeah, and so I was going to say, so it was a huge change to, instead of being, just dealing with people who are asleep mostly, or are in the hospital bed and you barely wake them up and you look at their wound and you leave, and you don't talk to them a lot. And it was very much different to one of the guys that I joined. He knew everything about every one of his patients. He knew, oh yeah, your daughter Noelle got married in '97 and got married in Chicago suburb, and she played golf. I mean, and he knew this, and I'm like, why would you know any of that? It's the guy that you're seeing for problems peeing. Right. But he knew that. And I was always like, why would he do that? And I realized that in residency, it was a little bit of, my job was to make you better and get you out of the hospital. I didn't need to know anything about you really as a person. You were the nephrectomy. I knew the problem. And it was fascinating to learn. It's kind of fun to see these people. And I would see them, oh, you have an abnormal blood test. We need to have you come back every 6 months to see what's going on. And then I found that it was really enjoyable to talk to them, but I only need a couple minutes to talk to you about the blood test. And so what's your daughter doing? and I started putting in my note reminders to myself about, so that when I walked in, it wasn't just the guy with the high blood test. It was, oh, this is the guy with the daughter that got struck by lightning. Yep. That walks like this.
Obviously, there's robots, but you're still controlling robots, and maybe ultimately robots that are, kind of taking over things and assessing things and doing things. And in the medical world, of course, there's AI and, numbers, and make diagnoses, come up with these plans, this, that, and the other. But then there's always still going to be what makes us survive and what makes us unique. And it's going to be this conversation, this building of trust, the ability to explain to these patients, bond with these patients. And this is, as you said, we started evolving a long time ago into who should go to medical school, right? And that it's not just a great engineer who can figure out this machine and the numbers, but rather this person who can relate to people. And it sounds like this is what's a lot of what you were realizing.
What I learned, and it was so different than what I had just finished. And so it was that first year out after residency was probably the biggest learning in my entire life. Was sort of, I'm not doing what I thought I was. I'm doing something else. It was very interesting.
And I think it's really important for people to understand this, and that, they're, oh yeah, I'm going to be, I can do this, I can figure this out. Okay, but can you do the day-to-day, versus the day and a half, I should say, of surgery? The larger part of the job is not that, right?
Well, and to tell people that they need surgery, and most of the time, do they need it? Do they absolutely need it? And what are the pros and cons? And sort of a lot of it was sort of learning that, well, I'm not the one that has the side effect if something doesn't go well. And that it's if there's a 3% chance of this complication, you should know about it before you sign up to have the surgery. Because if you can't live, if you have that complication, maybe you shouldn't have that surgery, and you need to weigh and so a lot of it was sort of realizing that just because I look at something on paper and think somebody should have that surgery, that's not the right answer. Right. And certainly medicine back in the day was sort of the father figure that made all the decisions, and it wasn't up to you to decide, we'll tell you what's right. And so I had some of the patients in Iowa that were like, well, tell me what to do, doc. And I was like, no, 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 that's not what I do. My job is to give you the information and for you to decide, and I will help you get that answer. But I'm not picking for you. Yeah.
So it sounds like you are evolving, we'll say, right?
I hope.
A different person, and things were going pretty well.
Yeah, it was really a great experience. I mean, what I came out after residency was that I was very well trained, and to the point where I was confident in the things that I needed to do and what I knew what to do. And I had had enough experience that like some people will go back and they'll panic read, how do I do this again? And like, I would look at it for a reminder, but I knew it. Like, I didn't need to do that. And so then I could concentrate more on okay, well, where's the thing that could go wrong and how do I plan around that? And so it was that I was always 2 steps ahead of where I needed to be. And I think it was really the training, and whether it was the program itself or what I got out of it was different. And so I came out very confident in my ability, but not overly. Like, I knew what I couldn't do also. And so it made it way easier. Whereas, I mean, I saw some people who couldn't figure that out, and they'd have all these complications, and I would be able to figure out what not to do.
Yeah, I feel like when you first practice, you try to figure out, what do I need to do today? What do I need to do in this visit to get out of this? And what is the right answer today? And now, more mid-career, I just saw some patients this morning, but if this were to happen, then you can do this. Or I put like 2 more steps ahead and possible things to think about. I don't need to put any of that. I'm probably talking to myself anyway when I'm doing this. But like, are thinking so many steps ahead, and it's like chess, right? When you start evolving into steps ahead, it makes everything just so much easier. I didn't realize that parallel that you had there. So, again, you're doing well. Things are moving the right way here, right?
Yeah, and what was interesting was, so I go to this place that has 3 guys that are already been in practice. 2 of them are 20 years older than me, and 1 is 10 years older than me. And I thought, I'm going to come in and they're going to, teach me how to do this, and we'll just keep going on this path. And what was fascinating was that I get there and they were eager for me to teach them new things. And I didn't think that as this brand new grad that I was in that position. And it was really interesting that there was a lot of give and take, and they were really glad to have somebody who was 10 years closer to the most recent thing. One of them didn't use a camera when he operated. And I was like, what is wrong with you?
Maybe he had the shield.
And he's like, when I have my eye on the camera, I can feel when something. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't want to know. And so I convinced them, no, we're going all the cameras and we're getting out of there. But it was great. It was a really good experience for me. And it was interesting. And so I loved being the person to do the surgery. And I mean, I remember that there was somebody came in through the emergency room and they had a bleeding kidney, and the general surgeon was the only person there, and he's like, can you help? And, it was, of course. Yeah, I'll fix that for you.
And now you've got to focus, right? It's not just everything, right? When you were in general surgery.
Right.
So all of this is going, but that doesn't explain how you ended up here.
No. And so again, we were in Iowa for a minimum of 3 years for my wife to do her training. And so I figured in Iowa for 3 years, and then we'll move back to Arizona where all our family is, and it's done, easy, no problem. And so enjoyed kind of those 3 years. And then my wife went, as she was getting about a year before she finished, she looked and she's like, well, there is a job in Phoenix that might be okay. And then I found out, well, at 3 years, like all my retirement, I don't get any of it. I have to be here 4 years to get the money, the extra money that they were putting into retirement for me. So we got to stay one more year. So my wife's like, fine. And so she ends up staying at the University of Iowa for another year, but as a professor instead of as a fellow. And so as that year was getting closer, it was, okay, well, you find whatever job you want and I'll move. You put up with me, and so I'll do whatever. And she's like, I didn't love that job. We'll stay in Iowa until I find the right job. And every few years she'd go and look at other jobs, and we just kept staying in Iowa. And it was kind of really a great place. So at that point, when we moved there, we had a 2-year-old, and then we had another child about a year and a half later. And so then, and it's an easy place to raise kids. It's very peaceful and quiet. Like everybody, like you didn't have to watch the kids. Like the kids could be running outside and you didn't have to go with them or keep an eye on them because the neighbor was watching or whatever. And it was very safe and easy. And so we just sort of stayed until problems developed. And my wife was like, we either need to leave or I'm quitting medicine. And I was like, oh, and that was about 14 years after we had moved there. And it was 13 because it took a year to. And she's like, I'm being aggressively recruited to go to Wisconsin. I'm like, where's that? We're from Arizona. We need to move back. And so it was, and she went to look at some other jobs and she was like, it's kind of the best place. And we had been to the Dells once. I don't know. And I was like, okay. And so then it was, well, I own this private practice. The older 2 guys, one of them's dead, one of them retired. We have 2 brand new grads that have just joined us. So it's 4 of us, but 2 of us are like in practice. The other 2 are just starting. So like we're just paying them to do whatever. They're not like earning their keep yet. And so it's right at that point when I realize I need to leave. I need to get out of here. And so how do you sell a practice? And how do you tell your partner that you're bailing out on them? And so at the same time that I was looking for a job in Wisconsin, I basically talked to the hospital about buying our practice. And so we owned a building. Like I was like, well, you can buy the practice as long as you buy the building because I'm not holding on to that. And so I started talking to them, and it got serious enough that I then told my partner, by the way, I'm leaving, and we're either selling the practice or you have to figure out how to get me out of it. And so he's like, so the hospital wants to buy it? And so he wasn't sad I was leaving at all. After working with him for 14 years, I was a little hurt that they didn't care, but that was fine. And so we got it all set up to sell the practice. And then at the last minute, we told the hospital that I wasn't part of the deal, which they almost backed out of because I was the busiest clinically. And so they almost backed out. And at that point, I had already decided to come here. And so when my wife decided that, this is where we need to go, I sort of reached out to Madison, Wisconsin, urology area. And so at that point, there was a hospital called Meritor that was on its own, and they had just hired a urologist, and they were looking for another, so I could work for them. There was a group at Dean, which is another hospital in town, but they own a bunch of little hospitals around Wisconsin. And they had gone from private to being owned by Dean, and they did not want anybody else. And they hung up on me very rudely, I would add, on the phone and said, don't come. You're not welcome here, sort of thing. And they were very much like, there's no job here for you. Not only is there no job at our hospital, there's no job here in Madison for you. You shouldn't come. And then the university was nice enough to offer to take me on for, I don't remember what it was. I think it was 3 years that they would accept me, and then at that point we can decide what we wanted to do.
To be involved in research necessarily,
right?
The concept of academics, which is involved.
And now I've spent 14 years of just doing general urology. And I mean, I don't know. At this point, it's like, I'm not sure exactly how far behind I am with what I can do and what people are doing at the academic center, because I didn't keep up with them. I mean, I kept up with urology in general, but not them specifically. It was a little bit daunting for the concept of working with the university. Now, the one thing was that I sort of always pictured that I could be the old guy in the back of the operating room that I had when I was a resident, which was, with the scope camera, and he was on a chair. He couldn't see anything. And he would just be like, don't screw it up. And he was like 80. He had done 500 surgeries of this type that I was doing my third. And he's like, I can talk you through it. And I was like, I could be that guy when I'm 80. And it started when I was 45 instead. But I thought, you know what, it would be fun to have something like that. I always liked sort of talking through, hey, what would you do in this case, or other things like that. And so I thought it would be fun to have kind of these smart academic partners, and, they're doing cutting edge stuff. And I said, I could, and so to the chairman, I said, I could be the Swiss Army knife that fits in. Wherever you needed me to be, I could do it. And I still had the confidence in my abilities from that standpoint, but I didn't know how I would fit in. And at that point, nobody in our department had ever been hired who didn't do a fellowship. And so I don't think they knew what to do with me either. And so it was a very interesting start. But so the one practice told me not to come. The other hospital had hired one guy, and then I was potentially the second, and I went to talk to them. And they wanted somebody who did robotic surgery, which I had never picked up. And so I wasn't going to do that. And so when the university said that they'd take me, I was like, okay, I'm all in. And so it was a big change for me. And even better was I took 3 months off between jobs.
Yeah, that's something I'd recommend to anyone. Anytime you're switching, or take as much time as you can off.
Fun employment, I called it. It was the best. The nice thing was that I didn't really have to worry. When I started my new job in Iowa, I had just finished residency, so we didn't really have any money. And so it was tense. Like, you couldn't really take time off because you couldn't afford it. Whereas this was, I didn't have this huge pressure like I have to pay a bill. It was, I can take the time and help the kids, adjust to a new city, and I could learn the new city. And so I took 3 months, and I just loved it. It was probably a year too short. I probably should have taken a full year, but I didn't.
Getting up to 14, 15, I assume you're in transition here.
Right, so they were 16 and 13, I think, when we moved.
You feel that way?
That was good, because so my wife, they wanted her pretty aggressively, and so she started right away. She didn't take, maybe she took a couple of weeks off or something, but she didn't take like a significant amount. And so we were in a brand new city, and so I had 3 months where I could sort of learn the place with the kids and kind of help them transition to a new town and all that sort of thing. And so, yeah, it was kind of fun. They were so angry at me for moving them.
At that age?
Like I had ruined their life.
Going to high school, they wouldn't even be talking to those friends from middle school anyway. But they're not going to accept that at that time.
Right. And so it was, I bribed them like you. It wasn't just donuts. One of them demanded, they wanted to pick which school they went to. They wanted to have a vote in which house we bought. They demanded a trampoline, which my wife hates the idea of, because all she remembered from training in pediatrics was all the people with broken bones. And so, but they demanded, and so we bought one of those. And, but it was good. It was good.
Yeah, and as far as I know, things have worked out well. I mean, you're one of those people who I run into and always look happy, even if you're not happy, or even if you're stressed, you're joking about it at the same time. I think it's a key aspect of survival. But one of the things you mentioned at the very beginning was along the lines of finding the thing that makes you happy. And just from, I'm going to say, those little lines worth something, you probably would have made anything work.
I think I could have made a lot of things work. But I also, when I look back, what's interesting is that when I talked to the partner that was 10 years older than me in Iowa, and I said, if I had stayed there, I don't know that I could have done the same thing over and over and over again, and that I was really glad for the change. And one of the things that I love about being associated with the academics and the residency is dealing with kind of the excitement that I see in the trainees, the medical students, the residents, the fellows, and kind of see kind of the light come up in their eyes and the excitement when they're doing something new and other things. You know, when you're doing the same, I mean, yeah, we do, you know, there were 75 different surgeries that maybe we would do, and we would only do them sometimes. And it was fun and satisfying, but it wasn't the same as this.
But it's also always with the same people.
Yeah.
The academic center where you get these fresh people. Ooh,
every year, it's almost like, yeah, new family members.
Is to evolve as I go, and then even at some point cut back to like 10 or 20%, and be one of those weird, lurking old guys, you know, who just shows up to conferences in Stone Clinic or something. And that's about it. We've had a couple of them already, so I'm just going to follow their footsteps, you know, and do that. What I'm getting at is you can kind of evolve into different things. Like, look at what we're doing right now, right? This is like, nobody's doing this in private, right? So I think there are those angles which are great. But I'm glad you had the time with your kids and everything's worked out the way it is, you know, this far. Is there anything big you want to add?
I think it would be the main point of, don't feel like once you take step one that your path is just set, because there's so many variations. I think that, you know, all along the way, you know, during medical school, look how many times I changed what I was going to go into. And even residency, one of the guys that I started my first year of, I mean, he had matched in general surgery. And during our first year of general surgery together, he was like, I want to do anesthesia. And he changed, and he had a great life with that. But every step you feel like you know that you're going to point A, but there's a lot of times that, hey, it's easy to shift to B, and it's not a negative necessarily. And don't feel like this is the decision where it's only this way or that way.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing a lot through these conversations. Because outside of it, you just perceive everybody as just straight and narrow, and this is the way it was. They didn't need glasses, and they were fine, right? But realistically, people have these routes. Some of them get to happiness, some don't. And I think some people create happiness, and other people just don't. But thanks, Dan. This was great.
I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for coming, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
That was good stuff.
I didn't know how to squeeze it in there, but like, you know, you brought a whole new surgery to the state and to the university.
Part of the same thing, like